Manipulation isn't always obvious. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. If your organization runs on trust, you may unknowingly be vulnerable to threats from within. Insider manipulation silently erodes productivity, compromises decision-making, and quietly costs businesses between 5 to 15% of annual revenue. The challenge? It's hard to spot until it's too late. In the pages ahead, you'll discover how seemingly harmless interactions, like casual compliments, routine authority signals, or subtly distorted data, can mask hidden agendas. You'll learn how to recognize the patterns and psychological techniques used by insiders to influence, distort, and control your organization's decisions. This book isn't about paranoia. It's about empowering you with practical strategies to see clearly, protect effectively, and ensure that your trust is well placed. Even if you think it couldn't happen in your workplace, understanding these social engineering secrets is your first line of defense. Your company's integrity and future depend on your ability to spot manipulation before it strikes. Let's begin. Chapter 1: Hidden Battlefield. Your biggest security threat isn't wearing a hoodie in a dark basement. It's wearing a smile in your next team meeting. While you're installing firewalls and updating passwords, the real danger sits 3 chairs down from you, nodding along to your quarterly projections. They know your cognitive blind spots better than you do. They've studied your decision patterns, mapped your trust triggers, and they're about to hijack your next strategic choice without you even noticing. Welcome to the hidden battlefield of insider social engineering, where manipulation masquerades as collaboration, and your own team becomes the weapon pointed at your profit margins. The silent profit killer. Sarah thought she had it figured out. Her fintech startup was scaling fast, 2.3 million ARR, lean team of 12, investors circling for Series A. Then Marcus joined as head of operations. Charming guy, MIT MBA, always had data to back his suggestions. 6 months later, Sarah's company was hemorrhaging cash on a strategic pivot that made 0 sense. Key developers had quit. The Series A fell through. Marcus? He'd already landed at a competitor, with Sarah's product roadmap, customer insights, and 3 of her best engineers. The kicker? Sarah had approved every single decision that led to the collapse. Marcus never forced anything. He just influenced. A compliment here, some cherry-picked metrics there, a few everyone agrees moments in meetings, classic insider social engineering. Sarah's story isn't unique. It's epidemic. Research from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners shows that insider threats cause 5 to 15% annual revenue leakage across organizations. But here's what the studies don't capture: the psychological warfare that makes it possible. The subtle cognitive hijacking that turns smart leaders into unwitting accomplices. Hashtag the Trojan horse in your conference room. Traditional security thinking is backwards. We obsess over external threats, hackers, competitors, market disruption. Meanwhile, the most dangerous adversaries clock in every morning, grab coffee from your kitchen, and sit in on your strategy sessions. These aren't necessarily malicious actors. Sometimes they're ambitious colleagues who've learned that influence beats performance, disgruntled lieutenants who feel passed over, silver-tongued board members protecting their own interests, or simply people who've discovered that cognitive biases are easier to exploit than technical vulnerabilities. They don't need to break into your systems. You give them access. They don't need to steal your data. You share it in meetings. They don't need to sabotage your strategy. They help you sabotage it yourself. The weapon? Your own brain. How your mind becomes the battlefield. Every day, your brain processes thousands of decisions using mental shortcuts called heuristics. These cognitive biases help you move fast. Authority bias makes you trust experts. Reciprocity bias makes you return favors. Scarcity bias makes you act on limited opportunities. In a high-trust, fast-moving workplace, these shortcuts become superhighways for manipulation. When your VP of sales says, "The CEO loves this approach," authority bias, shows you a chart proving 300% growth potential, data distortion, and mentions that your biggest competitor is already moving in this direction, scarcity bias, your brain doesn't analyze. It complies. The manipulator doesn't even need to lie. They just need to know which buttons to press and when to press them. This is insider social engineering, the systematic exploitation of cognitive biases within organizational power structures. It's psychology weaponized against profit, culture, and strategic clarity. The insider threat lifecycle. Every internal manipulation follows a predictable pattern, what we call the insider threat lifecycle model. Phase 1, reconnaissance. They study your decision patterns, identify your cognitive triggers, map your trust network. Phase 2, influence. They deploy targeted bias exploitation, flattery loops, manufactured urgency, selective data presentation. Phase 3, consolidation. They normalize the new reality, rewrite team norms, and position themselves for the next manipulation cycle. Most leaders only notice Phase 3 when the damage is already done. The real power lies in detecting Phase 1 and intercepting Phase 2. The compound cost of cognitive hijacking. The financial impact is just the beginning. Unchecked insider manipulation creates a cascade of organizational damage. Decision quality erosion. When bias drives choices, strategic clarity dies. Projects get approved for politics, not profit. Resources flow to the loudest voice, not the best opportunity. Culture toxicity. Manipulation breeds mistrust. When team members realize that influence matters more than merit, engagement plummets. Your best people start looking for exits. Strategic drift. Without cognitive guardrails, companies lose their North Star. Vision becomes whatever the most persuasive person said in the last meeting. The numbers are stark. Organizations with high insider threat exposure show 23% higher voluntary turnover, 31% slower decision cycles, and 18% lower employee engagement scores. The trust deficit alone can tank a company's valuation by double digits. What happens when you don't act? Ignore insider social engineering, and you're not just risking one bad decision. You're creating a vulnerability that compounds over time. Year 1. Small manipulations slip through. A questionable hire here, a misdirected budget there, nothing catastrophic, but the precedent is set. Year 2. The manipulators get bolder. Bigger asks, riskier projects, more aggressive bias exploitation. Your cognitive defenses weaken with each successful attack. Year 3. Full capture. Your decision-making process is compromised. Key players have learned that manipulation works better than merit. Your company culture becomes a breeding ground for political games instead of profitable growth. The most insidious part? You'll think every decision was your idea. The winner's advantage. Smart leaders don't just build better products, they build better decision-making systems. They assume threats exist, seek contradictory evidence, and invite dissent. They understand that trust without verification isn't wisdom, it's naivety. Winners install cognitive firewalls the same way they install technical ones: multiple layers, constant updates, and regular penetration testing. They know that in the modern business battlefield, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one trying to break down your walls, it's the one you've already invited inside. Your Influence Firewall starts now. This book gives you a complete defense system against insider manipulation. You'll learn to spot the early warning signs, interrupt the manipulation lifecycle, and build a culture that's anti-fragile to cognitive attacks. We'll start with the threat lifecycle, mapping the 6 phases every manipulator follows and the specific intervention points that stop them cold. Then, we'll tackle authority exploits, showing you how to respect hierarchy while blocking rank-based manipulation. From there, we'll decode flattery loops and consensus coups, the subtle psychological techniques that turn your own team dynamics against you. We'll build shields against data distortion and gaslight tactics, then integrate everything into your personal influence firewall. By the final chapter, Mastery Momentum, you'll have transformed your leadership approach from reactive to proactive, from vulnerable to anti-fragile. The choice is yours. Right now, you're at a crossroads. You can continue operating with cognitive blind spots, hoping that good intentions and smart people will protect you from manipulation. Or you can acknowledge the reality that influence warfare is already happening in your organization and start fighting back. The manipulators are counting on your inaction. They're betting that you'll dismiss this as paranoia, that you'll trust in the inherent goodness of your team, that you'll prioritize harmony over vigilance. Don't give them that advantage. Your profit margins, your company culture, and your strategic vision are under attack right now. The question isn't whether insider manipulation is happening, it's whether you're going to do something about it. The battlefield is hidden, but the war is real, and it's time to start winning. But first, you need to understand exactly how the enemy operates, the precise sequence of moves that turns trusted colleagues into cognitive hijackers. The next chapter reveals the anatomy of every insider attack, phase by phase, so you can spot the pattern before it's too late. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Grow to the Top and activate notifications to receive more self-improvement tips that will supercharge your growth. And make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you for your support. Chapter 2, Threat Lifecycle. The attack started 3 months before anyone noticed. It began with David asking for access to the customer database. Just need to run some quick analytics for the board presentation, he said. Reasonable request. Smart guy. Recent hire with impressive credentials from a Fortune 500 company. Of course he got access. 2 weeks later, David was staying late, chatting with the engineering team about their biggest technical challenges. Building relationships, they thought. Getting up to speed. What they didn't realize was that David was mapping their frustrations, identifying who felt undervalued, cataloging every complaint about management decisions. By month 2, David was the guy everyone turned to for honest feedback about company direction. He had opinions about everything, always backed by data, always delivered with that concerned, helpful tone that made you feel like he really cared about the company's success. Month 3, David was essentially running strategy meetings. The CEO still thought he was making the decisions, but somehow every choice aligned perfectly with David's suggestions. The company pivoted toward David's former employer's market. Key engineers started questioning their equity packages. The board began asking uncomfortable questions about leadership. David never stole anything, never hacked a system, never broke a single rule. He just followed a pattern, a predictable sequence that insider manipulators have used for decades to capture organizations from within. The anatomy of organizational capture. What David executed wasn't random opportunism. It was a systematic campaign following what cybersecurity experts call a kill chain, a step-by-step progression that attackers use to penetrate, persist, and profit from their targets. In the digital world, hackers follow a clear sequence: reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, and command. Each phase builds on the last, creating momentum that becomes harder to stop with every successful step. Insider social engineers follow the exact same pattern, except their target isn't your server, it's your decision-making process. Their weapon isn't malware, it's your own cognitive biases. And their payload isn't data theft, it's influence capture. Understanding this life cycle changes everything. Instead of reacting to manipulation after it's already succeeded, you can spot the early warning signs and cut the attack chain before it reaches critical mass. The key insight: every phase exploits a specific psychological trigger. Reconnaissance leverages curiosity. Weaponization exploits obligation. Delivery uses doubt. Exploitation feeds on inertia. Installation relies on conformity. Command depends on authority bias. Once you know the pattern, you can't unsee it. Phase 1, the reconnaissance trap. The first phase looks completely innocent. It's the new hire asking thoughtful questions. The ambitious colleague requesting background on strategic decisions. The board member wanting to better understand the business. But reconnaissance isn't about gathering information. It's about gathering intelligence. The manipulator isn't just learning what you do. They're learning how you think, what triggers your decisions, and where your cognitive blind spots hide. They study your meeting patterns. Do you defer to data or gut instinct? Do you value consensus or decisive action? What makes you say yes quickly? What makes you hesitate? Who do you trust most? Who influences your thinking? They map your emotional landscape. What frustrates you? What excites you? What keeps you up at night? What would make you feel like a hero? They're building a psychological profile that will become their manipulation playbook. The reconnaissance phase succeeds because it feels like engagement. Someone is finally asking the right questions, showing genuine interest in your challenges, demonstrating the kind of strategic thinking you wish you saw more of. Your brain interprets this attention as validation and competence. But here's the trap. The questions aren't random. They're designed to reveal your decision-making patterns and identify your influence vectors. Every answer you give becomes ammunition for the next phase. Phase 2, weaponization through reciprocity. Once the manipulator understands your psychological landscape, they begin crafting weapons tailored specifically to your cognitive vulnerabilities. But these weapons don't look like weapons. They look like favors. The manipulator starts solving problems you didn't even know you had. They volunteer for the thankless project. They stay late to help with the presentation. They introduce you to a valuable contact. They share an insight that saves the company money. This isn't genuine helpfulness, it's weaponized reciprocity. Every favor creates a psychological debt. Every solution makes you more likely to say yes to their next request. Every helpful gesture builds their credibility account, which they'll cash in later. The brilliance of this phase is that it feels entirely positive. Someone is making your life easier, your company stronger, your decisions smarter. You start thinking of them as indispensable. You begin seeking their input on important matters. You trust their judgment because they've proven their value. But what you're really experiencing is the systematic construction of influence leverage. Each helpful act is a deposit in the reciprocity bank, earning interest that will compound in their favor when they need to make a withdrawal. Phase 3, delivery of the Trojan horse. The third phase is where the manipulation becomes active, but it's still disguised as collaboration. The manipulator begins floating ideas, suggestions, and recommendations that serve their agenda while appearing to serve yours. They don't propose anything obviously self-serving. Instead, they package their objectives inside solutions to your problems. They frame their goals as your opportunities. They present their interests as the company's interests. The delivery mechanism is usually a presentation, a proposal, or a strategic recommendation. It's backed by data they've carefully curated, supported by arguments that appeal to your specific cognitive biases, and positioned as the logical next step based on everything you've discussed together. The proposal feels inevitable. Of course, this is what you should do. The logic is sound, the data is compelling, and the person presenting it has proven their competence repeatedly. Your brain doesn't analyze, it accepts. But hidden inside this reasonable-sounding proposal is the payload, a decision that shifts power, resources, or strategic direction in ways that benefit the manipulator's true agenda. Phase 4, exploitation of cognitive inertia. Once you've accepted their initial proposal, the manipulator moves into exploitation mode. They begin expanding their influence by leveraging the psychological principle of consistency bias, your brain's desire to remain consistent with previous decisions. Since you already agreed to their first suggestion, you're psychologically primed to agree to related suggestions. Since you already trusted their judgment once, you're more likely to trust it again. Since you already gave them access to one area, giving them access to related areas feels natural. The manipulator doesn't push hard. They don't need to. They just keep presenting logical extensions of decisions you've already made. Each yes makes the next yes easier. Each concession creates momentum for the next concession. This phase succeeds because it feels like natural progression. You're not being manipulated, you're being consistent. You're not losing control, you're following through on your own decisions. The manipulator has successfully reframed their agenda as your strategy. Phase 5, installation of new norms. By the fifth phase, the manipulator has achieved something remarkable. They've changed how your organization makes decisions without anyone realizing it. The new normal includes consulting them on important matters, deferring to their expertise, and following their recommendations. They've installed themselves as a critical node in your decision-making network. Information flows through them. Proposals get their input. Strategic discussions include their perspective. They've become indispensable, not through force, but through perceived value. The installation phase is the most dangerous because it's self-reinforcing. The more central they become to your decision process, the harder it becomes to make decisions without them. The more you rely on their input, the more valuable that input seems. The more they influence outcomes, the more credit they get for success. At this point, removing them would feel like losing a key strategic asset. Questioning their motives would feel like paranoia. Challenging their recommendations would feel like rejecting proven wisdom. Phase 6, command and control. The final phase is where the mask comes off, but only if you know what to look for. The manipulator now has sufficient influence to drive decisions that serve their agenda, even when those decisions conflict with your organization's best interests. They might push for strategic pivots that benefit their previous employer. They might advocate for hiring decisions that bring in their allies. They might recommend vendor relationships that provide them with kickbacks. They might influence policy changes that increase their power while reducing yours. But here's the insidious part. They've structured the situation so that these decisions feel like your decisions. You're not being controlled. You're being influenced to control yourself in ways that serve their interests. The command phase succeeds because the manipulator has become your trusted advisor. When they recommend something, you don't see manipulation. You see strategic guidance from someone who's proven their value repeatedly. The Apple Canary Trap. One of the most famous examples of lifecycle interception comes from Apple's approach to leak detection. When Steve Jobs suspected insider information was being shared with competitors, Apple implemented what became known as canary documents, fake strategic plans with subtle variations distributed to different employees. When details from these documents appeared in competitor products or media reports, Apple could trace the leak back to its source by identifying which version had been compromised. The key insight was catching the threat during the weaponization phase, after reconnaissance, but before delivery. This approach worked because it recognized that insider threats follow predictable patterns. By understanding the life cycle, Apple could set traps at the most vulnerable transition points and catch manipulators before they achieved their objectives. The mythology of insider security. Most organizations operate under dangerous myths about insider threats. They believe background checks prevent manipulation, that small teams aren't targets, that good people don't become bad actors, and that obvious red flags will signal problems. These myths are deadly because they focus attention on the wrong indicators. Background checks reveal past behavior, not future intentions. Small teams are actually more vulnerable because trust levels are higher and oversight is lighter. Good people can be manipulated into serving bad agendas without realizing it. And the most dangerous manipulators never trigger obvious red flags. They're too smart for that. The reality is that insider manipulation succeeds precisely because it doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like engagement, helpfulness, strategic thinking, and collaborative problem solving. The threat isn't the obviously suspicious person, it's the person who seems too good to be true. Building your recon radar. The first line of defense against the threat lifecycle is early detection. You need systems that flag unusual patterns during the reconnaissance phase before the manipulator has time to build influence and credibility. Start by tracking information requests that seem slightly outside someone's role or responsibility. Pay attention to questions about decision-making processes, influence networks, and strategic priorities. Notice when someone shows unusual interest in your frustrations, concerns, or pressure points. Create a simple tracking system for these interactions. When someone asks for access to data, information, or people, note the request, the justification, and the timing. Look for patterns that suggest systematic intelligence gathering rather than legitimate business needs. The goal isn't to become paranoid about every question or request. It's to develop pattern recognition that helps you distinguish between normal curiosity and systematic reconnaissance. Breaking the chain. Once you understand the life cycle, you can design interventions that break the chain at each transition point. The key is matching your defensive strategy to the specific psychological mechanism being exploited at each phase. During reconnaissance, deploy curiosity filters that require justification for information requests. During weaponization, implement reciprocity audits that track favor patterns. During delivery, use proposal verification that demands independent validation. During exploitation, establish consistency checks that question decision momentum. During installation, maintain norm monitoring that flags process changes. During command, preserve authority audits that challenge influence concentration. Each intervention is designed to interrupt the psychological flow that makes the life cycle effective. By breaking even one link in the chain, you can prevent the entire attack from succeeding. The 48-hour rule. One of the most effective tactics for lifecycle disruption is the 48-hour decision delay. When someone presents a proposal that feels urgent, compelling, and obviously correct, resist the impulse to decide immediately. Instead, implement a mandatory cooling-off period that gives you time to analyze the request outside the influence bubble. During this delay, ask yourself 3 questions. What specific problem does this solve? Who benefits most from this decision? What would I decide if this person wasn't involved in the recommendation? The 48-hour rule works because it breaks the momentum that lifecycle attacks depend on. It creates space for rational analysis instead of emotional reaction. It allows you to consult other perspectives instead of relying solely on the manipulator's framing. Most legitimate proposals survive the 48-hour test. Most manipulation attempts don't. But understanding the life cycle is just the beginning. The most sophisticated manipulators don't just follow the pattern, they weaponize the very authority structures that are supposed to protect you. In the next chapter, we'll explore how titles, credentials, and organizational hierarchy become tools of influence warfare, and why the person saying the CEO wants this might be the last person you should trust. Chapter 3: Authority Exploits. The CEO wants this done by Friday. 5 words, no explanation, no context, no supporting data, just a simple statement that sent Jennifer's entire marketing team into overdrive, scrapping their carefully planned campaign to chase a last-minute pivot that made 0 strategic sense. The request came from Tom, the new VP of Strategy. He dropped it casually in the hallway, mentioned it was straight from the top, and walked away before anyone could ask questions. Jennifer felt that familiar knot in her stomach, the one that appears when something feels wrong, but challenging, it feels worse. So she didn't challenge it. None of them did. They just executed. 2 weeks later, during the quarterly review, Jennifer mentioned the campaign pivot to the CEO. His response, "I never asked for that. Who told you I did?" Tom had vanished by then. New job at a competitor, taking with him detailed knowledge of their upcoming product launches, marketing strategies, and competitive positioning. The campaign pivot hadn't just wasted resources, it had been a cover story for systematic intelligence gathering. The weapon Tom used wasn't sophisticated technology or elaborate deception. It was something far more powerful, the illusion of authority. The invisible crown. Authority bias is your brain's shortcut for navigating complex social hierarchies. When someone appears to have legitimate power, your mind automatically shifts into compliance mode. It's an evolutionary adaptation that helped our ancestors survive in tribal structures where challenging the wrong person could mean exile or death. In modern organizations, this same mechanism creates a vulnerability that manipulators exploit with surgical precision. They don't need actual authority. They just need to project the appearance of authority convincingly enough to trigger your brain's automatic deference response. The scariest part? It works on everyone. Senior executives fall for authority manipulation just as easily as junior employees. Intelligence, experience, and skepticism provide no immunity. If anything, successful leaders are more vulnerable because they're used to making quick decisions based on limited information. Authority exploits succeed because they feel legitimate. When someone says, "The board wants this," or "legal approved it," or "the CEO is asking for it," your brain doesn't fact-check, it complies. The manipulator has borrowed credibility from a legitimate source and used it to push through their own agenda. The anatomy of authority theft. Authority manipulation follows a predictable pattern that's both simple and devastatingly effective. The manipulator doesn't claim to be the authority, they claim to represent the authority. This subtle distinction provides plausible deniability while delivering maximum psychological impact. The setup usually involves three elements: a credible authority figure, an urgent timeline, and limited verification opportunity. The manipulator mentions that someone important wants something done quickly, and the situation is structured so that checking with the actual authority would be awkward, time-consuming, or politically risky. The delivery mechanism varies, but the psychology remains constant. It might be an email with the CEO's name in the subject line, a meeting where someone casually mentions board priorities, a hallway conversation about what senior leadership is thinking. The key is creating the impression that questioning the request would mean questioning the authority figure themselves. The manipulator often adds urgency to prevent verification. The CEO needs this before the board meeting. Legal wants it by end of day. The client is expecting it first thing Monday. The time pressure creates a choice between compliance and confrontation, and most people choose compliance. The Milgram effect in pinstripes. Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiments in the 1960s revealed something disturbing about human nature. Ordinary people will inflict harm on others when directed by an authority figure. Participants administered what they believed were painful electric shocks to strangers simply because a researcher in a lab coat told them to continue. The corporate world provides a more subtle but equally powerful version of this dynamic. Employees will approve questionable expenditures, ignore ethical concerns, or compromise strategic priorities when they believe the directive comes from above. The lab coat has been replaced by the corner office, but the psychological mechanism remains unchanged. General Stanley McChrystal discovered this firsthand when he took command of Joint Special Operations Command in Iraq. Despite having some of the most elite soldiers in the world, his organization was failing because junior officers wouldn't challenge senior decisions, even when those decisions were clearly wrong. McChrystal's solution was radical. He flattened the hierarchy during decision-making processes. Junior officers were required to voice objections. Senior leaders had to justify their positions with evidence, not rank. Anyone could challenge any decision if they had better information. The result? Dramatically improved performance. When authority bias was neutralized, the best ideas rose to the top, regardless of who proposed them. Decision quality improved because rank stopped trumping reason. The corporate uniform. Modern authority manipulation relies heavily on symbols and signals that communicate status without requiring actual verification. The manipulator doesn't need to be the CEO. They just need to dress, speak, and act like someone the CEO would trust. These signals include everything from email signatures and meeting invitations to casual name-dropping and strategic positioning. The manipulator might mention their MBA from a prestigious school, reference their previous experience at a well-known company, or casually mention conversations with senior leadership. The goal isn't to lie about their position. It's to create an aura of authority that makes questioning them feel inappropriate. They position themselves as the conduit between you and the real decision-makers, making verification seem like a breach of protocol rather than due diligence. This approach is particularly effective in fast-moving organizations where informal communication is common and formal approval processes are seen as bureaucratic obstacles. The manipulator exploits the culture of trust and speed to bypass the very safeguards that would expose their deception. The CC chain of command. One of the most sophisticated authority manipulation techniques involves the strategic use of email carbon copies. The manipulator sends a request and includes senior leaders in the CC field, creating the impression that those leaders are aware of and supportive of the request. The psychology is brilliant. Recipients assume that if the CEO is copied on the email, the CEO must have approved the request. They don't want to look foolish by questioning something that senior leadership is obviously aware of, so they comply without verification. But here's the trap. Being copied on an email doesn't equal approval. The senior leaders might not have read the email, might not understand its implications, or might not realize they're being used to legitimize the request. The manipulator has weaponized the appearance of transparency to create false authority. This technique is particularly effective because it exploits social proof as well as authority bias. Not only does the request appear to have senior approval, but it also appears that other people are aware of and presumably supportive of it. The combination creates powerful pressure to comply without questioning. The signature drop. Another common authority exploit involves casually mentioning conversations with senior leaders that may or may not have actually occurred. The manipulator drops these references strategically to add weight to their requests and recommendations. I was just talking to Sarah about this, and she thinks we should move quickly. The CEO mentioned this as a priority in our last one-on-one. The board is really focused on this area right now. These statements are difficult to verify without directly challenging the manipulator's credibility, which most people are reluctant to do. The beauty of this technique is its ambiguity. The manipulator isn't necessarily lying. They might have had a conversation with Sarah, just not about this specific topic. The CEO might have mentioned this area as important, just not as an immediate priority. The board might be focused on this generally, just not in the way the manipulator is suggesting. This ambiguity provides protection while delivering influence. If questioned, the manipulator can clarify or reframe their statement without admitting deception. But the initial impact, the authority borrowed from the name drop, has already achieved its purpose. The hierarchy hack. The most dangerous authority exploits don't just borrow credibility from senior leaders, they hack the hierarchy itself. The manipulator positions themselves as the unofficial liaison between different levels of the organization, controlling information flow and shaping perceptions on both sides. They tell senior leaders what junior employees are thinking, and they tell junior employees what senior leaders want. They become the interpreter of organizational priorities, the translator of strategic direction, the bridge between vision and execution. And in that position, they gain enormous influence over both groups. This technique is particularly effective in larger organizations where direct communication between levels is limited. The manipulator exploits the information asymmetry to position themselves as indispensable while gradually shifting organizational priorities to align with their agenda. The hierarchy hack succeeds because it provides value to both sides. Senior leaders get insights into ground-level concerns. Junior employees get clarity on strategic priorities. Everyone feels better informed and more connected. The manipulation is invisible because it's wrapped in genuine organizational improvement. The verification firewall. The antidote to authority exploitation isn't skepticism, it's verification. You need systems that allow you to respect hierarchy while protecting against authority manipulation. The goal is creating a culture where, because the CEO said so, is the beginning of the conversation, not the end of it. Start with the 5-question authority audit. Who specifically made this request? Why is it a priority right now? What evidence supports this direction? What's the impact if we wait for verification? What alternatives did they consider? These questions don't challenge authority, they clarify it. Implement role rotation in meetings where junior team members chair discussions and senior leaders participate as contributors rather than decision makers. This breaks the automatic deference pattern and ensures that ideas are evaluated on merit rather than source. Create verification protocols that make checking authority claims easy and routine rather than awkward and confrontational. Establish a simple system where anyone can request clarification on directives without implying distrust or insubordination. The polite challenge script. One of the most effective tools for neutralizing authority manipulation is the polite challenge script, a respectful way to request verification without triggering defensive reactions. Instead of questioning the authority directly, you question your own understanding. I want to make sure I understand the priority correctly. Can you show me the brief or email where this was outlined? This approach assumes good faith while creating space for verification. It's not challenging the authority, it's ensuring accurate execution. I'm getting conflicting signals on priorities. Can we quickly confirm this with Sarah so I can communicate clearly to the team? This frames verification as coordination rather than skepticism. It positions you as trying to be helpful rather than difficult. This is moving fast, and I want to make sure we're aligned. Should I loop in the CEO to confirm timing and scope? This uses urgency as justification for verification rather than an excuse to skip it. It turns speed into a reason for clarity rather than a barrier to it. The red flag protocol. Establish a simple system that allows anyone to flag potential authority manipulation without creating confrontation or bureaucracy. This might be as simple as a Slack emoji that signals verification needed, or a standard phrase that requests clarification. The key is making the flag feel routine rather than accusatory. It's not saying you're lying, it's saying, let's double-check this together. The goal is creating a culture where verification is normal, expected, and appreciated rather than suspicious, unusual, and resented. Train your team to recognize the common patterns of authority manipulation: urgent requests with limited verification time, name-dropping without specific details, CC chains that imply approval, and casual references to conversations that can't be easily confirmed. The authority paradox. Here's the paradox of authority exploitation. The more legitimate authority someone has, the less they need to invoke it. Real leaders provide context, welcome questions, and encourage verification. They understand that their authority is strengthened, not weakened, by transparency and accountability. Manipulators, on the other hand, rely heavily on authority symbols because they lack actual authority. They invoke names, titles, and hierarchies because their ideas can't stand on their own merit. They discourage questions because questions expose the weakness of their position. This creates a useful heuristic. Be most suspicious of authority claims that discourage verification. When someone says, "The CEO wants this," and then adds, "but don't bother him with questions," you're probably dealing with manipulation rather than legitimate direction. The shared consciousness solution. McChrystal's shared consciousness model provides a blueprint for organizations that want to maintain hierarchy while neutralizing authority bias. The key insight is separating decision-making authority from information-sharing responsibility. Leaders retain the right to make final decisions, but they lose the right to make uninformed decisions. Anyone with relevant information has the responsibility to share it, regardless of rank. Anyone with concerns has the obligation to voice them, regardless of hierarchy. This approach preserves the efficiency of hierarchical decision-making while eliminating the blind spots that authority bias creates. It ensures that the best information reaches decision-makers while preventing manipulators from exploiting deference dynamics. The result is an organization that's both respectful of authority and resistant to authority manipulation. Leaders get better information, employees feel more engaged, and manipulators lose their primary weapon. But authority isn't the only tool in the manipulator's arsenal. Sometimes, the most dangerous influence comes wrapped in the most pleasant package: compliments, recognition, and praise that feel wonderful in the moment but carry a hidden price. The next chapter reveals how flattery becomes a weapon and why the person who makes you feel most appreciated might be the one you should trust least. Chapter 4: Flattery Loops. You're absolutely brilliant at this. I've never seen anyone grasp complex market dynamics the way you do. Rachel felt the familiar warm glow spread through her chest. After 18 months of grinding through the startup's toughest challenges, someone finally recognized her strategic thinking. The compliment came from Marcus, the new business development director, during their weekly pipeline review. "That's exactly why I think you should see this opportunity I've been working on," Marcus continued, sliding a proposal across the table. "It's perfect for someone with your vision." The proposal was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. It would require redirecting 40% of their engineering resources toward an unproven market. The timeline was aggressive, the risk was substantial, but Marcus's confidence was infectious, and his praise still echoed in Rachel's mind. "You're the only one who could pull this off," he added, sealing the deal. 3 months later, the project had burned through $800,000 with nothing to show for it. The engineering team was demoralized. 2 key developers had quit. And Marcus? He'd already moved on to a competitor, taking detailed knowledge of their product roadmap and a list of their most talented engineers. Rachel couldn't understand how she'd been so wrong about the opportunity. She was usually cautious with resource allocation, methodical in her analysis, skeptical of big promises. But somehow, in that moment, Marcus's proposal had felt not just reasonable, but inevitable. What Rachel didn't realize was that she hadn't been evaluating a business proposal. She'd been caught in a flattery loop, a sophisticated manipulation technique that weaponizes praise to bypass critical thinking. The dopamine hijack. Compliments trigger one of the most powerful neurochemical responses in the human brain. When someone praises your intelligence, vision, or capabilities, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in addiction, gambling, and falling in love. This dopamine hit doesn't just feel good, it fundamentally alters your decision-making process. The same brain regions that evaluate risk and analyze data become flooded with feel-good chemicals that prioritize reward over reason. Your critical faculties don't disappear, but they get significantly quieter, while the praise-seeking voice gets much louder. Manipulators understand this neurochemical vulnerability and exploit it with surgical precision. They don't just compliment you randomly, they time their praise strategically to create maximum psychological impact right before making their request. The flattery loop works because it creates a psychological debt. When someone makes you feel valued, appreciated, and understood, your brain automatically seeks ways to reciprocate. The manipulator has made a deposit in your emotional bank account, and now they're ready to make a withdrawal. But here's the insidious part. The withdrawal always seems reasonable in the moment. The proposal feels logical, the opportunity seems obvious, the risk appears manageable. The flattery hasn't just made you more likely to say yes, it's made you believe that yes is the smart choice. The architecture of adoration. Effective flattery manipulation follows a specific structure that maximizes psychological impact while minimizing suspicion. The manipulator doesn't just throw around generic compliments, they craft praise that feels personal, specific, and earned. The setup begins with observation. The manipulator studies your insecurities, aspirations, and areas where you seek validation. They identify the qualities you're most proud of and the recognition you feel you deserve but rarely receive. This intelligence gathering phase is crucial because generic flattery feels hollow, while targeted praise feels profound. The delivery involves 3 elements: specificity, timing, and escalation. The manipulator doesn't say you're smart. They say, your analysis of the competitive landscape was incredibly insightful. They don't praise you when you're confident. They praise you when you're uncertain. And they don't stop at one compliment. They build a crescendo of admiration that culminates in their request. The most sophisticated practitioners add a 4th element: exclusivity. They don't just tell you that you're capable. They tell you that you're uniquely capable. I've worked with a lot of executives, but you're the only one who really gets this. This exclusivity makes the praise feel more valuable while simultaneously isolating you from other perspectives that might challenge their proposal. The Starbucks wake-up call. Howard Schultz learned about flattery manipulation the hard way when he returned as CEO of Starbucks in 2008. The company was struggling, having expanded too rapidly and lost focus on its core mission. Schultz found himself surrounded by executives who constantly praised his vision while supporting decisions that were clearly damaging the brand. "Everyone kept telling me how brilliant the expansion strategy was," Schultz later reflected. "They praised my leadership while the company was falling apart around us. I realized that the people who made me feel best about myself were often the ones giving me the worst advice." Schultz's solution was radical. He instituted what he called constructive dissent sessions, where team members were required to challenge major decisions. He also implemented a praise audit, where compliments had to be backed by specific evidence and alternative viewpoints had to be presented alongside positive feedback. The result was a dramatic turnaround. Decision quality improved because praise was separated from problem solving. Team members learned to give honest feedback instead of flattering feedback. And Schultz developed immunity to manipulation by recognizing that the most valuable team members were often the ones who made him feel least comfortable in the moment. The praise-to-ask ratio. One of the most revealing patterns in flattery manipulation is the correlation between compliment frequency and request magnitude. Manipulators instinctively understand that bigger asks require more psychological preparation, so they increase their praise output accordingly. For routine requests, they might offer a single casual compliment. For moderate asks, they'll provide multiple compliments over several interactions. For major requests, the ones that involve significant resources, risk, or strategic change, they'll deploy sustained flattery campaigns that can last weeks or months. This pattern creates a measurable signature that you can learn to recognize. When someone's praise frequency suddenly increases, especially if it's followed by a significant request, you're likely dealing with manipulation rather than genuine appreciation. The most dangerous version of this pattern involves what researchers call intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable bursts of praise that create psychological dependency. Like a slot machine that pays out randomly, intermittent flattery keeps you engaged and hopeful while gradually increasing your willingness to take risks for the manipulator's approval. The emotional intelligence trap. High EQ leaders often believe they're immune to flattery manipulation because they understand emotional dynamics and can read people's motivations. This confidence becomes a vulnerability because it creates blind spots around their own susceptibility to praise-based influence. The reality is that emotional intelligence makes you better at giving flattery, not necessarily better at detecting when it's being used against you. You can recognize manipulation when it's directed at others while remaining vulnerable when it's directed at you. The dopamine response to praise is neurochemical, not intellectual. It bypasses your analytical capabilities regardless of how sophisticated they are. In fact, high EQ leaders are often more vulnerable to flattery manipulation because they value emotional connection and appreciate when others recognize their capabilities. They're also more likely to reciprocate emotional generosity, making them ideal targets for manipulators who understand how to exploit empathy and social intelligence. The key insight is that emotional intelligence is a tool, not armor. It helps you understand what's happening, but it doesn't automatically protect you from what's happening. You need specific defenses against flattery manipulation, not just general awareness of emotional dynamics. The gratitude filter. The antidote to flattery manipulation isn't cynicism, it's systematic evaluation. You need filters that allow you to appreciate genuine recognition while detecting weaponized praise. The goal is maintaining healthy relationships and positive team dynamics while protecting yourself from influence exploitation. Start with the 3-step detox ritual. Count, confirm, and contextualize. Count the compliments you receive in relation to requests being made. Confirm the specific evidence behind the praise. Contextualize the timing and motivation behind the recognition. This process doesn't require you to reject all compliments or become suspicious of positive feedback. It simply creates space between the emotional impact of praise and the decision-making process that follows. You can feel good about recognition while still thinking clearly about requests. Implement peer review huddles where team members can provide alternative perspectives on major decisions. When someone praises your vision for a new initiative, ask others to evaluate the initiative independently. When someone compliments your strategic thinking, test that thinking against other strategic frameworks. The mirror and pivot response. When you suspect flattery manipulation, use the mirror and pivot technique to deflect the praise while maintaining the relationship. Mirror the compliment back to the team or organization, then pivot to evidence-based evaluation. I appreciate that feedback, but this success really belongs to the whole team. Let's look at the data behind this proposal. This response acknowledges the compliment without internalizing it, redirects credit to prevent ego inflation, and shifts focus to objective analysis. Thank you for saying that. I think our success comes from rigorous evaluation processes. What evidence do we have that this approach will work? This technique uses the compliment as a bridge to higher standards rather than lower defenses. The mirror and pivot approach works because it doesn't reject the manipulator or create confrontation. It simply redirects the conversation from emotional validation to rational evaluation. The manipulator can't object without revealing their manipulation, and you maintain your decision-making integrity without damaging relationships. The silent count strategy. Develop the habit of silently counting praise-to-ask ratios during meetings and conversations. When someone compliments you, note it mentally. When they make a request, evaluate whether the praise was proportional to the ask. This isn't about becoming paranoid or rejecting all positive feedback. It's about developing pattern recognition that helps you distinguish between genuine appreciation and strategic manipulation. Over time, you'll develop an intuitive sense for when praise feels authentic versus when it feels calculated. The silent count strategy also helps you recognize your own vulnerability patterns. You might discover that you're most susceptible to flattery when you're stressed, uncertain, or seeking validation. This self-awareness allows you to implement additional safeguards during high-risk periods. The appreciation audit. Create regular opportunities for genuine appreciation that aren't connected to requests or decisions. Schedule team recognition sessions, celebrate achievements without asking for anything in return, and provide specific, evidence-based feedback about performance and contributions. This serves two purposes. It satisfies the legitimate human need for recognition while creating a baseline that makes manipulation more obvious. When appreciation is routine and unconditional, conditional praise becomes easier to spot. The appreciation audit also helps you maintain team morale while implementing flattery defenses. Team members need to know that questioning praise patterns doesn't mean rejecting positive feedback entirely. It means ensuring that recognition is genuine and that decisions are based on merit rather than emotional manipulation. The exclusivity warning. Be especially suspicious of praise that emphasizes your unique capabilities or exclusive qualifications. Manipulators use exclusivity to isolate you from other perspectives and create pressure to live up to the special status they've assigned you. You're the only one who can handle this. I've never met anyone with your combination of skills. This opportunity is perfect for someone with your unique background. These statements feel flattering, but they're designed to prevent you from seeking other opinions or considering alternative approaches. When someone emphasizes your exclusivity, deliberately seek out other perspectives. Ask team members what they think. Consult with advisors or mentors. Research similar decisions made by other organizations. The goal is breaking the isolation that exclusivity creates and ensuring that your decision-making process includes multiple viewpoints. The flattery addiction. Some leaders become psychologically dependent on flattery, seeking out people who make them feel good about themselves while avoiding those who challenge their thinking. This creates a feedback loop where manipulators gain influence while honest advisors lose access. The flattery addiction is particularly dangerous because it feels like confidence and leadership. You're surrounded by people who appreciate your vision, support your decisions, and recognize your capabilities. The fact that these same people are gradually steering you toward choices that serve their interests rather than yours becomes invisible. Breaking flattery addiction requires deliberately seeking out discomfort. Surround yourself with people who challenge your assumptions, question your logic, and provide honest feedback even when it's unflattering. Value truth-tellers over ego-strokers, even when truth-telling feels less pleasant in the moment. But flattery is just one weapon in the manipulator's arsenal. Sometimes the most dangerous influence comes not from individual praise, but from the illusion of group consensus, when an entire room seems to agree with a proposal that serves hidden agendas. The next chapter reveals how manipulators orchestrate artificial agreement and why the most dangerous decisions are often the ones that feel most obvious to everyone involved. Chapter 5: Consensus Coup. The meeting felt perfect, too perfect. Everyone was nodding. The energy was positive. The discussion flowed smoothly from problem to solution without a single objection. When the vote came, it was unanimous. 12 hands raised in support of the most expensive product pivot in the company's history. Lisa should have felt triumphant. As VP of Product, she'd been pushing for this strategic shift for months, but something nagged at her as she watched her team file out of the conference room, chatting excitedly about implementation timelines and resource allocation. Where was the debate? Where were the hard questions? Where was the skepticism that usually characterized her team's decision-making process? 3 weeks later, she discovered the answer. The meeting hadn't been a decision. It had been a performance. The real decision had been made in a series of one-on-one conversations, hallway chats, and pre-meeting alignments orchestrated by Derek, the new head of strategy. By the time they sat down in the conference room, the outcome was already determined. Derek had spent 2 weeks building his coalition. He'd addressed each team member's concerns privately, offered compromises that felt like wins, and created the impression that everyone else was already on board. When the official meeting happened, no one wanted to be the lone dissenter against what appeared to be overwhelming consensus. The pivot failed spectacularly. 6 months and $2.3 million later, they were back to their original strategy. But Derek was gone by then, having leveraged his successful strategic leadership into a VP role at a competitor. He'd taken with him detailed knowledge of their product roadmap, customer insights, and the hard-learned lessons from their expensive mistake. Lisa realized she hadn't witnessed consensus. She'd been the victim of a consensus coup. The illusion of agreement. Human beings are wired to seek harmony and avoid conflict. This evolutionary adaptation helped our ancestors survive in small tribes where social cohesion meant the difference between life and death. But in modern organizations, this same instinct creates a vulnerability that skilled manipulators exploit with devastating effectiveness. The consensus coup doesn't rely on authority or flattery. It weaponizes our natural desire to belong. The manipulator doesn't force agreement. They create the illusion that agreement already exists. They don't argue for their position. They make their position appear to be everyone's position. The technique is so effective because it feels democratic and collaborative. No one is being pressured or coerced. Everyone has a voice. The decision emerges naturally from group discussion. The fact that the discussion was carefully orchestrated and the outcome predetermined becomes invisible to participants who experience only the final performance. This manipulation succeeds because it exploits two powerful psychological biases: social proof and conformity pressure. When we believe that others support a decision, we're more likely to support it ourselves. When we fear being the only dissenter, we often choose silence over confrontation. The manipulator leverages these tendencies to manufacture consensus where none actually exists. The pregame strategy. The most sophisticated consensus manipulations happen before the meeting even begins. The manipulator identifies key stakeholders and approaches them individually, building support one person at a time through carefully tailored conversations. Each conversation is customized to address that person's specific concerns, interests, and motivations. The manipulator doesn't use the same argument with everyone. They use the argument most likely to resonate with each individual. The engineer hears about technical elegance. The finance person hears about cost savings. The sales leader hears about market opportunity. But here's the crucial element. Each person is told that others are already supportive. I've been talking to Sarah about this, and she thinks it's a great direction. The engineering team is really excited about the technical possibilities. Finance has already signed off on the budget implications. These statements might be true, partially true, or completely fabricated. The accuracy doesn't matter. The psychological impact does. Each person believes they're joining a growing consensus rather than being the first to support an uncertain proposal. The manipulator has created momentum by claiming momentum that may not actually exist. The meeting theater. By the time the official meeting happens, the real decision-making process is complete. The meeting becomes a theatrical performance designed to create the appearance of democratic deliberation while delivering a predetermined outcome. The manipulator controls this performance through careful agenda management, strategic information sharing, and subtle social pressure. They might forget to send out pre-reading materials until the last minute, preventing thorough analysis. They might introduce new data during the meeting that supports their position but can't be verified in real time. They might structure the discussion to address minor details while treating major assumptions as settled facts. The most insidious element is the false choice framework. The manipulator presents their preferred option alongside obviously inferior alternatives, making their choice appear reasonable by comparison. They don't ask, should we do this? They ask, which of these three approaches should we take? The question assumes that action is necessary and limits debate to implementation details rather than fundamental strategy. The meeting concludes with what appears to be unanimous agreement, but it's actually manufactured consent. People support the decision not because they believe it's optimal, but because they believe everyone else believes it's optimal. The manipulator has created a consensus mirage that feels real to everyone trapped inside it. The Churchill Dissent Protocol. Winston Churchill understood the danger of artificial consensus during World War II. As Prime Minister, he was surrounded by advisors who often told him what they thought he wanted to hear, rather than what he needed to know. Military decisions based on false consensus could cost thousands of lives and potentially lose the war. Churchill's solution was radical for its time. He institutionalized dissent. Every major decision required at least one person to argue the opposing position, regardless of their personal beliefs. Cabinet meetings included mandatory devil's advocate presentations. Strategic proposals had to address potential failure modes before they could be approved. The protocol wasn't designed to create conflict. It was designed to surface hidden risks and alternative perspectives that might otherwise remain unexpressed. Churchill recognized that the most dangerous decisions were often the ones that felt most obvious to everyone in the room. This approach proved its value repeatedly throughout the war. Decisions that initially seemed to have unanimous support were improved or abandoned entirely after structured dissent revealed critical flaws. The protocol didn't slow down decision-making. It improved decision quality by ensuring that apparent consensus was actually informed consensus. Modern organizations like SpaceX have adopted similar approaches for mission-critical decisions. Before every launch, teams are required to present failure scenarios and argue against proceeding. This pre-mortem process has prevented numerous disasters by surfacing concerns that might otherwise have been suppressed by group pressure to maintain consensus. The Ash Line Experiment. Solomon Ash's famous conformity experiments in the 1950s revealed something disturbing about human psychology. People will deny obvious reality to avoid disagreeing with a group. Participants were shown lines of clearly different lengths, but gave incorrect answers when surrounded by confederates who provided wrong responses first. The corporate world provides countless opportunities for similar conformity pressure. When everyone in the meeting seems to support a proposal, dissenting feels like challenging not just the idea, but the group itself. When the discussion assumes certain facts are true, questioning those facts feels like questioning everyone's intelligence. The Ash effect is particularly powerful in high-stakes business environments where being wrong can damage your reputation and career prospects. It's safer to go along with a bad decision that everyone supports than to oppose a good decision that might fail. The manipulator exploits this risk calculus by making dissent feel personally dangerous while making compliance feel professionally safe. Understanding the Ash effect helps explain why smart, experienced professionals often support decisions they privately doubt. They're not being stupid or weak. They're responding to powerful social pressures that override individual judgment. The solution isn't stronger individuals. It's better systems that protect and encourage dissent. The groupthink trap. Irving Janis coined the term groupthink to describe how cohesive groups can make catastrophically bad decisions while feeling completely confident in their reasoning. The phenomenon occurs when the desire for harmony becomes more important than the quality of decision-making. Groupthink has several telltale characteristics: illusion of unanimity, pressure on dissenters, self-censorship of doubts, belief in group morality, stereotyping of outsiders, and illusion of invulnerability. These symptoms create a feedback loop where bad decisions feel like good decisions because everyone agrees they're good decisions. The consensus coup deliberately triggers groupthink by creating artificial cohesion around the manipulator's agenda. They foster an us versus them mentality, where supporting their proposal becomes a loyalty test. They discourage outside perspectives by framing external input as interference. They create time pressure that prevents thorough analysis while making quick agreement feel like decisive leadership. Organizations with strong groupthink tendencies are particularly vulnerable to consensus manipulation because their culture already suppresses dissent and rewards conformity. The manipulator doesn't need to create these dynamics. They just need to exploit dynamics that already exist. The silent start solution. One of the most effective defenses against consensus manipulation is the silent start technique. Before any group discussion begins, participants spend 5 minutes writing down their initial thoughts, concerns, and questions about the proposal. These written responses are collected before anyone speaks. This approach serves multiple purposes. It captures individual perspectives before group pressure can influence them. It ensures that concerns are documented even if they're not voiced during discussion. It creates a baseline that can be compared to the final decision to identify how much the group dynamic influenced the outcome. The silent start also reveals consensus manipulation attempts by showing the gap between private thoughts and public positions. When written responses show significant concerns, but verbal discussion shows unanimous support, you're likely dealing with manufactured consensus rather than genuine agreement. Implement the silent start as a standard practice for all significant decisions. Make it clear that written input is valued and will be considered even if it's not voiced during discussion. Create a culture where changing your mind based on new information is seen as wisdom rather than weakness. The red team rotation. Establish a rotating devil's advocate role where different team members are assigned to argue against proposals regardless of their personal opinions. This institutionalizes dissent and makes it safe by making it official. The red team member's job is to identify potential failure modes, challenge underlying assumptions, and present alternative approaches. They're not trying to kill good ideas, they're trying to strengthen ideas by stress testing them before implementation. The role rotates so that no one becomes permanently associated with negativity or obstruction. This approach works because it separates the person from the position. When Sarah argues against the proposal, she's not being difficult. She's fulfilling her assigned role. When the proposal survives red team analysis, confidence in the decision is genuinely earned rather than artificially manufactured. The red team rotation also helps team members develop critical thinking skills and become more comfortable with constructive conflict. Over time, the entire team becomes better at identifying potential problems and asking hard questions, making consensus manipulation much more difficult. The anonymous objection channel. Create a system that allows team members to raise concerns anonymously, either before or after meetings. This might be a simple online form, a suggestion box, or a dedicated Slack channel where people can voice doubts without revealing their identity. Anonymous feedback serves as an early warning system for consensus manipulation. When public discussion shows unanimous support, but anonymous feedback reveals significant concerns, you know that social pressure is suppressing honest input. The gap between public and private positions indicates that the consensus is manufactured rather than genuine. Make it clear that anonymous feedback is valued and will be addressed seriously. Share summaries of anonymous input with the team without revealing sources, and use it to reopen discussions when necessary. Create a culture where raising concerns is seen as helpful rather than disloyal. The pre-mortem poll. Before finalizing any major decision, conduct a pre-mortem exercise where team members anonymously answer the question, if this decision fails, what will be the most likely reasons? Collect these responses and discuss them openly before proceeding. The pre-mortem poll serves multiple functions. It legitimizes pessimistic thinking by framing it as risk management rather than negativity. It surfaces concerns that might otherwise remain hidden due to social pressure. It creates an opportunity to address potential problems before they become actual problems. The anonymous format is crucial because it allows people to voice doubts without appearing to oppose the group consensus. Someone might not feel comfortable saying, "I think this will fail because," in a meeting, but they might be willing to write it down anonymously for consideration. The 80% rule. Establish a decision-making standard that requires 80% consensus rather than unanimity. This approach recognizes that perfect agreement is often artificial agreement and that some level of dissent is healthy and normal. The 80% rule prevents consensus manipulation by making it acceptable, even expected, for some people to disagree with major decisions. It removes the pressure to achieve unanimous support and creates space for legitimate concerns to be expressed and considered. When implementing the 80% rule, make it clear that the 20% who disagree are not expected to sabotage the decision or withhold their best efforts. They're simply acknowledging that they would have chosen a different approach while committing to support the team's choice. The consensus audit. After implementing major decisions, conduct regular audits to evaluate the quality of your consensus building process. Compare the initial written input from silent starts to the final decision. Review anonymous feedback to identify patterns of suppressed dissent. Analyze outcomes to determine whether unanimous decisions perform better or worse than decisions with acknowledged disagreement. These audits help you calibrate your consensus-building systems and identify when manipulation might be occurring. They also help team members understand the difference between healthy consensus and manufactured consensus, making them more resistant to future manipulation attempts. The goal isn't to eliminate consensus or create constant conflict. It's to ensure that when consensus exists, it's based on genuine agreement rather than social pressure, incomplete information, or skilled manipulation. But consensus manipulation is just one way that manipulators distort the decision-making process. Sometimes the most dangerous influence comes not from manufactured agreement, but from carefully curated information. Data that tells a compelling story while hiding the most important parts of the truth. The next chapter reveals how numbers become weapons and why the most convincing evidence might be the most misleading. Chapter 6, Data Distortion. The chart was beautiful. Clean lines, clear trends, compelling conclusions. Customer satisfaction was up 47%. Revenue per user had increased 23%. Market share was growing steadily. Every metric pointed in the same direction. The new product strategy was working brilliantly. Michael stared at the presentation slides, feeling that familiar mix of pride and validation. As Chief Product Officer, he'd championed this strategy against significant internal resistance. The data vindicated his vision and silenced his critics. The board would be thrilled. "This is exactly what we needed to see," said Alina, the new head of analytics, clicking to the next slide. "The numbers don't lie." But 3 months later, the numbers were telling a very different story. Customer churn had spiked to crisis levels. Revenue was plummeting. The product strategy that looked so successful in Elena's charts had nearly destroyed the company. Emergency board meetings replaced celebration dinners. Layoffs replaced expansion plans. How had the data been so wrong? The answer came during the post-mortem investigation. Elena's charts hadn't been wrong, they'd been incomplete. Customer satisfaction was up 47%, but only among users who'd survived the first month. Revenue per user had increased 23%, but user count had dropped 60%. Market share was growing, but the market itself was shrinking rapidly. Elena had presented accurate numbers that told a completely false story. She'd weaponized data by showing only the metrics that supported her narrative while hiding the metrics that contradicted it. By the time the manipulation was discovered, Elena had already moved on to a competitor, taking with her detailed knowledge of their product roadmap and strategic vulnerabilities. Michael realized he hadn't been looking at analytics. He'd been looking at a carefully crafted illusion designed to support a predetermined conclusion. The tyranny of selective truth. Data manipulation is the most insidious form of organizational deception because it feels like objectivity. Numbers seem neutral, scientific, and immune to personal bias. When someone presents a chart or cites a statistic, our brains automatically assign credibility to the information. We're wired to trust quantified evidence over qualitative arguments. This trust creates a massive vulnerability that skilled manipulators exploit with surgical precision. They don't need to lie about the numbers. They just need to choose the right numbers while hiding the wrong ones. They don't need to fabricate data. They just need to frame existing data in ways that support their agenda. The technique is devastatingly effective because it provides the appearance of analytical rigor while delivering predetermined conclusions. The manipulator presents themselves as a data-driven decision-maker who follows evidence wherever it leads. The fact that they've carefully curated that evidence to lead exactly where they want it to go becomes invisible to audiences who see only the final presentation. This manipulation succeeds because it exploits our cognitive bias toward confirmation. When data supports what we want to believe or what seems reasonable, we rarely dig deeper to understand what the data doesn't show. We accept the story the numbers tell without questioning whether it's the complete story. The architecture of statistical deception. Effective data manipulation follows specific patterns that maximize persuasive impact while minimizing the risk of detection. The manipulator doesn't randomly select favorable metrics. They systematically construct a narrative using carefully chosen data points that create the illusion of comprehensive analysis. The foundation of this manipulation is baseline shifting. The manipulator selects time periods, comparison groups, or measurement criteria that make their preferred outcome look optimal. They might compare current performance to a particularly bad period rather than long-term averages. They might measure success using metrics that naturally favor their approach while ignoring metrics that don't. The second layer involves denominator manipulation. The manipulator changes what they're measuring against to create more favorable ratios. Revenue per customer looks great when you exclude churned customers. Conversion rates appear excellent when you narrow the definition of qualified leads. Success rates seem impressive when you redefine what constitutes success. The third layer is survivorship bias exploitation. The manipulator focuses on positive outcomes while systematically excluding negative ones. They highlight successful case studies while ignoring failures. They showcase satisfied customers while hiding churned ones. They present average results from survivors while excluding data from those who didn't survive the process. The Volkswagen deception engine. One of the most notorious examples of systematic data manipulation occurred at Volkswagen during the emissions scandal that erupted in 2015. For nearly a decade, the company had been installing software in diesel vehicles that detected when emissions testing was occurring and temporarily reduced pollution output to pass regulatory requirements. The manipulation was sophisticated and multi-layered. During normal driving, the vehicles produced nitrogen oxide emissions up to 40 times higher than legal limits. But during testing conditions, the software activated a clean mode that dramatically reduced emissions while also reducing performance and fuel efficiency. Volkswagen's internal presentations showed impressive environmental performance data that was technically accurate during testing conditions, but completely false during real-world usage. Engineers created charts showing compliance with emissions standards while knowing that the same vehicles violated those standards every day on actual roads. The scandal revealed how data manipulation could persist for years within a large organization because the metrics being reported were technically correct within their narrow context. The problem wasn't false data, it was selectively true data that created a false impression of overall performance. When the manipulation was finally exposed, Volkswagen faced over $30 billion in fines and settlements. The company's reputation was permanently damaged, and several executives faced criminal charges. The scandal demonstrated how data distortion could create massive financial and legal liability while feeling completely justified to those creating the distorted metrics. The dashboard delusion. Modern organizations often believe that sophisticated dashboards and real-time analytics protect them from data manipulation. The assumption is that more data equals better decisions, and that comprehensive metrics eliminate the possibility of selective reporting. This belief is dangerously naive. Dashboards can actually make data manipulation easier by creating the illusion of transparency while hiding the selection and framing decisions that determine what gets measured and how it gets presented. The manipulator doesn't need to hide data, they just need to influence which data gets prioritized and how it gets interpreted. The most sophisticated data manipulators become the architects of the dashboard itself. They volunteer to design metrics, suggest KPIs, and recommend analytical frameworks. By controlling the measurement system, they can ensure that the data naturally supports their agenda while appearing to provide objective oversight. Dashboard manipulation is particularly effective because it operates at the system level rather than the individual report level. Instead of manipulating specific presentations, the manipulator shapes the entire analytical framework so that routine reporting consistently supports their narrative. The bias becomes embedded in the infrastructure rather than applied to individual outputs. The framing effect weapon. Data manipulators understand that context shapes perception more powerfully than the actual numbers. The same statistic can support completely different conclusions depending on how it's framed, what it's compared to, and what additional information is provided or withheld. Consider a simple example. Our customer satisfaction score increased from 3.2 to 3.8 this quarter. This sounds positive until you learn that the scale goes from 1 to 10, that the industry average is 7.2, and that the increase came entirely from dissatisfied customers leaving rather than satisfied customers staying. The manipulator exploits framing effects by controlling the context around their data. They choose comparison points that make their performance look optimal. They select time windows that capture favorable trends while excluding unfavorable ones. They present absolute numbers when percentages would be less flattering, and percentages when absolute numbers would be more revealing. The most sophisticated practitioners layer multiple framing effects to create compound distortion. They might use a favorable baseline, exclude negative outliers, focus on a narrow time window, and present results as percentages rather than absolute values. Each individual choice seems reasonable, but the cumulative effect creates a completely distorted picture of reality. The triangulation defense. The antidote to data manipulation isn't skepticism, it's verification. You need systems that allow you to trust data while protecting against selective reporting and contextual distortion. The goal is creating a culture where numbers inform decisions rather than justify predetermined conclusions. Start with the triangulation principle. No major decision should rely on data from a single source or perspective. Require multiple independent metrics that measure the same underlying phenomenon from different angles. If customer satisfaction is up, churn should be down. If revenue per user is increasing, total revenue should be growing unless user count is deliberately shrinking. Implement the 3-layer verification funnel that examines source, context, and contradiction. Source verification ensures that data comes from reliable, independent sources rather than potentially biased internal reporting. Context verification examines baselines, comparison groups, and time windows to ensure fair representation. Contradiction verification actively seeks data that might challenge or complicate the primary narrative. Create a decision impact score that weights each metric by the potential downside risk of being wrong. High-stakes decisions require higher standards of evidence and more comprehensive verification. Low-risk decisions can proceed with less rigorous data validation, but major strategic choices demand bulletproof analytical foundations. The outlier hunt. One of the most revealing techniques for detecting data manipulation is the systematic search for outliers and excluded data points. Manipulators often achieve favorable averages by excluding negative results, focusing on best-case scenarios, or cherry-picking time periods that support their narrative. Before accepting any analytical conclusion, demand to see the full dataset, including outliers, failures, and negative results. Ask specifically about data points that were excluded and the criteria used for exclusion. Request scatter plots rather than just averages to understand the distribution of results rather than just the central tendency. The outlier hunt often reveals the most important information for decision-making. The customers who churned might provide more valuable insights than the customers who stayed. The failed experiments might teach more than the successful ones. The worst-performing time periods might reveal systemic vulnerabilities that need addressing. Make outlier analysis a standard part of your data review process. Train your team to automatically ask about excluded data, negative results, and worst-case scenarios. Create a culture where comprehensive analysis is valued more than favorable conclusions. The time window flip. Data manipulators often achieve favorable trends by carefully selecting time windows that exclude unfavorable periods or capture temporary fluctuations rather than sustainable patterns. The time window flip technique helps detect this manipulation by systematically varying the measurement period to see how conclusions change. If someone presents quarterly growth data, ask to see annual trends. If they show annual improvements, request monthly breakdowns. If they highlight recent performance, examine longer historical patterns. If they focus on absolute growth, calculate percentage changes. If they emphasize percentage growth, review absolute numbers. The goal isn't to find the right time window, it's to understand how sensitive the conclusions are to timing choices. Robust trends should be visible across multiple time horizons, while manipulated data often depends on very specific measurement periods to support its narrative. Implement automatic time window variation as part of your analytical review process. Require all trend analysis to include multiple time perspectives and to explicitly address how conclusions might change with different measurement periods. Make temporal sensitivity analysis a standard requirement for strategic decisions. The contradiction protocol. Establish a systematic process for seeking data that contradicts or complicates the primary narrative being presented. This isn't about being negative or obstructionist. It's about ensuring that decisions are based on complete information rather than selective evidence. Create a standard set of questions that get asked about every significant data presentation. What data would contradict this conclusion? What metrics are we not measuring that might tell a different story? What would we expect to see if this trend were unsustainable? What external factors might be influencing these results? Assign someone the specific role of contradiction hunter for important decisions. Their job is to actively seek disconfirming evidence, alternative explanations, and potential blind spots in the analysis. This role should rotate to prevent anyone from being permanently associated with negativity while ensuring that contrarian perspectives are systematically included. The contradiction protocol works because it institutionalizes intellectual humility and scientific thinking. Instead of seeking data that confirms what you want to believe, you actively seek data that challenges what you think you know. This approach leads to more robust decisions and makes data manipulation much more difficult to execute successfully. The full stack evidence standard. Implement a comprehensive evidence standard that requires multiple types of data before making major decisions. Quantitative metrics must be supported by qualitative insights. Internal data must be validated by external benchmarks. Historical trends must be contextualized by current market conditions. The full stack approach prevents manipulators from creating compelling narratives based on narrow slices of information. It's much harder to manipulate a comprehensive analytical framework than it is to cherry-pick individual metrics that support a predetermined conclusion. Create templates and checklists that ensure full-stack analysis becomes routine rather than exceptional. Train your team to automatically ask for missing pieces of the analytical puzzle. Make comprehensive evidence a cultural expectation rather than a bureaucratic requirement. The 24-hour data lock. To prevent analysis paralysis while maintaining analytical rigor, implement a 24-hour data lock before major decisions. Once the analytical review period closes, no new data can be introduced to influence the decision. This creates urgency around comprehensive analysis while preventing last-minute manipulation through selective information introduction. The data lock also forces manipulators to present their complete case up front, rather than gradually introducing favorable data while withholding unfavorable information. It creates a clear boundary between analysis and decision-making that prevents the analytical process from being hijacked by advocacy. Use the 24-hour period for final verification, contradiction hunting, and full-stack review. Make it clear that this is the time for raising analytical concerns, requesting additional data, or challenging underlying assumptions. Once the lock period ends, the decision proceeds based on available information. But data manipulation is just one weapon in the influence warfare arsenal. Sometimes the most dangerous attacks don't distort information. They distort reality itself, making you question your own memory, judgment, and perception of events. The next chapter reveals how manipulators wage war on truth itself, and why the most insidious influence technique might be the one that makes you doubt everything you thought you knew. Chapter 7, Gaslight Shield. I never said that. 4 simple words that made Jessica question everything. She was sitting across from Robert, the new VP of Operations, discussing the budget allocation they'd agreed on just 3 days earlier. She clearly remembered the conversation. They'd spent 40 minutes working through the numbers, and Robert had enthusiastically endorsed the marketing spend increase. Now he was looking at her with genuine confusion, as if she'd invented the entire discussion. "I think you might be misremembering," Robert continued, his tone gentle but firm. "I've been consistently advocating for operational efficiency. Marketing expansion doesn't align with my priorities at all." Jessica felt that familiar knot in her stomach, the same feeling she'd been experiencing more frequently since Robert joined the team 6 months ago. Conversations that seemed clear in the moment became fuzzy in retrospect. Agreements that felt solid turned out to be misunderstandings. Her own memory, usually reliable, seemed to be failing her at crucial moments. "Maybe I'm confusing it with another conversation," she heard herself saying, even though she knew she wasn't. 2 weeks later, Jessica discovered the truth during a casual chat with her assistant. Robert had indeed agreed to the marketing budget increase, but only after extracting a promise that Jessica would support his proposal to outsource customer service to his former company. A proposal she'd never agreed to, but somehow found herself defending in the next board meeting. Robert hadn't just denied their conversation, he'd rewritten it entirely, turning her memory into a weapon against her own judgment. Jessica realized she wasn't dealing with simple disagreement or miscommunication. She was being systematically gaslit by someone who understood that controlling perception was more powerful than controlling facts. The reality distortion field. Gaslighting is perhaps the most insidious form of manipulation because it attacks the foundation of rational decision-making, your confidence in your own perception of reality. The technique gets its name from the 1944 film Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife into believing she's losing her sanity by subtly altering their environment while denying that anything has changed. In organizational settings, gaslighting follows a similar pattern, but operates through professional rather than personal relationships. The manipulator doesn't need to make you question your sanity. They just need to make you question your memory, judgment, and interpretation of events. Once they've undermined your confidence in your own perceptions, they can shape your understanding of reality to serve their agenda. The technique is devastatingly effective because it exploits a fundamental vulnerability in human psychology, our reliance on social validation to confirm our understanding of the world. When someone confidently contradicts our memory of events, especially someone we perceive as credible or authoritative, our brain automatically begins to doubt itself. This doubt creates an opening that skilled manipulators exploit with surgical precision. They don't need to convince you that their version of events is correct. They just need to make you uncertain about your own version. Once uncertainty is established, they can gradually substitute their narrative for your memory, reshaping your understanding of past events to justify future decisions that serve their interests. The anatomy of organizational gaslighting. Corporate gaslighting operates through a combination of memory manipulation, selective documentation, and strategic communication that creates systematic confusion about what actually happened in key interactions. The manipulator doesn't rely on a single dramatic incident. They build a pattern of small distortions that accumulate over time. The process typically begins with subtle contradictions of your memory during low-stakes interactions. The manipulator might claim they never received an email you're certain you sent, or insist that a meeting covered different topics than you remember. These initial contradictions feel minor, so you're likely to assume honest miscommunication rather than deliberate manipulation. As the pattern continues, the contradictions become more significant and more frequent. The manipulator begins denying conversations that led to important decisions, claiming they never agreed to commitments you're certain they made, or insisting that their previous positions were completely different from what you remember. The most sophisticated practitioners add a third layer. They begin questioning your general reliability and memory. They express concern about your stress levels, suggest that you might be overwhelmed, or recommend that you take notes because you seem to be forgetting important details. This meta-manipulation makes you doubt not just specific memories, but your overall cognitive reliability. The whisper campaign strategy. Gaslighting becomes exponentially more powerful when combined with strategic rumor spreading that undermines your credibility with other team members. The manipulator doesn't just attack your memory directly, they create a social environment where others begin to question your reliability as well. The whisper campaign operates through carefully planted suggestions rather than direct accusations. The manipulator might express private concern about your decision-making to other team members, mention that you seem stressed or overwhelmed, or suggest that you've been making uncharacteristic mistakes recently. These conversations are always framed as concern rather than criticism. The manipulator positions themselves as worried about your well-being rather than critical of your performance. This approach makes the target feel supported rather than attacked, making them less likely to recognize the manipulation while simultaneously undermining their credibility with colleagues. The whisper campaign creates a feedback loop that reinforces the direct gaslighting. When other team members begin to question your memory or judgment, it validates the manipulator's suggestions that you might be unreliable. This social validation makes you more likely to doubt yourself and more willing to defer to the manipulator's version of events. The Oprah Clarity Protocol. Oprah Winfrey learned about the destructive power of workplace rumors early in her media career, when false stories about her personal life and business decisions began affecting her professional relationships and decision-making confidence. Her response became a model for organizational transparency that many companies have since adopted. Winfrey implemented what became known as clarity meetings, regular sessions where team members could address rumors, contradictions, or misunderstandings directly, rather than allowing them to fester through private conversations. The meetings had strict ground rules. All concerns had to be raised openly, all parties involved had to be present, and all resolutions had to be documented. The Clarity Protocol served multiple purposes. It prevented rumors from spreading through private channels by creating a public forum for addressing concerns. It made gaslighting more difficult by requiring manipulators to contradict their targets in front of witnesses rather than in private conversations. And it created a culture where transparency was valued over harmony, making it safer for people to raise concerns about manipulation. The results were dramatic. Workplace rumors decreased by over 80% within 6 months. Decision-making speed increased because less time was spent navigating interpersonal confusion. Team morale improved because people felt safer raising concerns and more confident that their perceptions would be validated when accurate. Most importantly, the Clarity Protocol made systematic manipulation much more difficult. Gaslighters rely on private conversations and selective communication to create confusion. When all significant interactions happen in documented, witnessed settings, the manipulation techniques lose their effectiveness. The memory maze. One of the most disorienting aspects of organizational gaslighting is how it exploits the natural limitations of human memory. Our brains don't store conversations like digital recordings. They store impressions, emotions, and general themes that can be influenced by subsequent information and social pressure. The manipulator understands these limitations and exploits them by introducing doubt at strategic moments. They might wait several days after a conversation before contradicting your memory, allowing time for natural memory decay to create uncertainty. They might acknowledge partial elements of your memory while denying crucial details, making you question which parts are accurate. The most sophisticated practitioners use what psychologists call source confusion. They acknowledge that a conversation or agreement occurred, but claim it involved different people or different terms than you remember. This technique is particularly effective because it validates your general memory while undermining the specific details that matter for decision-making. The memory maze becomes even more complex when the manipulator introduces false documentation or selective evidence that appears to support their version of events. They might reference emails that don't exist, claim that witnesses remember events differently, or produce meeting notes that contradict your recollection of what was discussed. The documentation defense. The most effective defense against gaslighting is systematic documentation that creates an objective record of important interactions and decisions. This doesn't mean recording every conversation or creating bureaucratic paper trails. It means establishing simple habits that preserve key information in ways that can't be easily manipulated. Start with the 4D method: document, date, disclose, and diffuse. Document important conversations immediately after they occur, focusing on key decisions, commitments, and next steps. Date all documentation with specific timestamps that can be verified. Disclose the documentation to relevant parties so that your record-keeping is transparent rather than secretive. Diffuse potential conflicts by sharing documentation proactively rather than defensively. The key is making documentation feel routine and collaborative rather than suspicious or confrontational. Frame it as ensuring clarity and preventing miscommunication rather than protecting against manipulation. Most team members will appreciate the clarity that good documentation provides, while manipulators will be deterred by the difficulty of contradicting written records. Implement the Show Me Email protocol for any significant disagreement about past conversations or commitments. When someone claims they never said something or never agreed to something, ask them to show you the email or documentation that supports their version. This simple request often resolves honest misunderstandings while exposing deliberate manipulation. The witness triangle. Create a systematic approach to including neutral witnesses in important conversations, especially those involving commitments, decisions, or potential conflicts. The witness triangle involves bringing at least two other people into any discussion where gaslighting might occur, ensuring that multiple perspectives are available if disputes arise later. The witnesses don't need to be active participants in the conversation. They just need to be present and aware of what's being discussed. This might involve including an assistant in strategic meetings, copying additional team members on important emails, or conducting significant conversations in open spaces where others can overhear. The witness triangle serves multiple purposes. It makes gaslighting much more difficult because the manipulator would need to convince multiple people to support their false narrative. It provides independent verification of what actually occurred in important interactions. And it creates social pressure for honest communication because people are less likely to lie or manipulate when they know others are watching. Make the witness triangle feel natural and collaborative rather than suspicious or defensive. Frame it as ensuring good communication and preventing misunderstandings rather than protecting against manipulation. Most legitimate business conversations benefit from having multiple perspectives and broader awareness of important decisions. The Truth Sync Ritual. Establish regular Truth Sync meetings where team members can address any confusion, contradictions, or concerns about recent interactions. These brief sessions, typically 10-15 minutes at the beginning of team meetings, create a routine opportunity to clarify misunderstandings before they become major conflicts. The Truth Sync ritual operates on the principle that small confusions are easier to resolve than large ones, and that public clarification is more effective than private speculation. Team members can raise questions about decisions, commitments, or communications without creating confrontation or implying bad faith. Structure the Truth Sync around three simple questions. What needs clarification from recent interactions? Are there any contradictory messages or commitments that need resolution? What documentation or follow-up is needed to prevent future confusion? This framework keeps the discussion focused on clarity rather than blame. The ritual works because it normalizes the process of questioning and clarifying rather than making it feel like an accusation or confrontation. It also creates regular opportunities to catch gaslighting attempts early before they can build into systematic manipulation campaigns. The Anonymous Disclosure Channel. Create a confidential system that allows team members to report manipulation attempts without fear of retaliation. This might be an anonymous feedback form, a confidential hotline, or a trusted third party who can investigate concerns without revealing sources. The disclosure channel serves as an early warning system for systematic manipulation that might not be visible to leadership. Gaslighting often targets specific individuals while remaining invisible to others, so victims may feel isolated and uncertain about whether their experiences are valid. Make it clear that the disclosure channel is for reporting patterns of manipulation rather than individual disagreements or personality conflicts. Provide specific examples of the behaviors you want reported. Systematic contradiction of documented agreements, spreading rumors about someone's reliability, claiming conversations never occurred when there's evidence they did. The channel also serves a deterrent function. Manipulators are less likely to engage in systematic gaslighting when they know there's a confidential reporting mechanism that could expose their behavior. The mere existence of the channel signals that the organization takes manipulation seriously and has systems in place to detect it. The reality anchor system. Develop personal and organizational habits that create stable reference points for validating your perception of events. These reality anchors serve as objective checks against manipulation attempts that try to distort your understanding of what actually happened. Personal reality anchors include keeping a brief daily journal of important interactions, maintaining email records of significant conversations, and developing relationships with trusted colleagues who can provide independent perspectives on events. The goal isn't paranoia, it's creating multiple sources of validation for your memory and judgment. Organizational reality anchors include standardized meeting minutes, recorded decision logs, and transparent communication practices that make it difficult for anyone to rewrite history. These systems benefit everyone by improving clarity and accountability while making manipulation more difficult. The anchor system works because it provides multiple independent sources of truth that can't be easily manipulated by a single person. When someone tries to gaslight you about a past conversation, you can reference your journal, check your emails, or ask a colleague who is present. The manipulator can't control all these sources simultaneously. The confidence calibration. Gaslighting succeeds by undermining your confidence in your own perceptions and memories. The antidote is systematic confidence calibration, regularly checking your memory and judgment against objective evidence to maintain accurate self-assessment of your reliability. Keep track of instances where your memory was accurate versus instances where you were mistaken. This creates a realistic baseline for understanding your own cognitive reliability. Most people discover that their memory is much more accurate than gaslighters would have them believe, especially for significant conversations and commitments. When someone contradicts your memory, don't automatically assume you're wrong. Instead, seek objective evidence that can validate or contradict your recollection. Check emails, ask witnesses, or review documentation before accepting that your memory is faulty. The calibration process helps you distinguish between honest mistakes and systematic manipulation. Everyone occasionally misremembers details or misinterprets conversations. But when contradictions follow patterns, always favoring one person's agenda, always occurring at convenient times, always lacking supporting evidence, you're likely dealing with manipulation rather than memory problems. But gaslighting and reality distortion are just components of a larger influence warfare system. All the techniques we've explored, authority exploitation, flattery loops, consensus manipulation, data distortion, and reality revision, can be integrated into a comprehensive defense framework that protects your decision-making process from every angle. The next chapter reveals how to build an influence firewall that automatically detects and neutralizes manipulation attempts before they can compromise your judgment. Chapter 8, Influence Firewall. The proposal looked perfect, too perfect. David stared at the presentation slides spread across his desk, feeling that familiar tingle of unease that had saved his company more times than he could count. The new market expansion strategy had everything: compelling data, enthusiastic team support, clear implementation timeline, and projected returns that would make the board ecstatic. But something felt wrong. 6 months earlier, David would have approved the proposal immediately. The numbers were solid, the team was aligned, and the opportunity seemed obvious. But 6 months earlier, he'd also approved 3 other obvious opportunities that had collectively cost his company $4.2 million and nearly destroyed team morale. The difference wasn't the quality of the proposals, it was the system David had built to evaluate them. What looked like a straightforward business decision was actually passing through a sophisticated filter designed to catch manipulation before it could compromise his judgment. The proposal wasn't just being evaluated on its merits, it was being stress-tested against every influence technique he'd learned to recognize: authority exploitation, flattery loops, consensus manipulation, data distortion, and reality revision. Each layer of analysis asked different questions, applied different standards, and required different types of evidence. By the time the evaluation was complete, the perfect proposal had revealed itself as a carefully constructed manipulation designed to benefit the presenter's previous employer. The compelling data was cherry-picked. The team's support was manufactured through private conversations. The implementation timeline ignored critical dependencies. The projected returns assumed market conditions that didn't exist. David's Influence Firewall had caught what his instincts had missed, and his analysis had overlooked. The system had protected him from his own cognitive biases while preserving his ability to recognize genuine opportunities. The architecture of cognitive defense. An influence firewall operates on the same principle as a computer firewall. It creates multiple layers of protection that examine incoming information for threats before allowing it to reach critical systems. But instead of scanning for malware, it scans for manipulation. Instead of protecting servers, it protects decision-making processes. The concept emerged from a simple observation. Single-layer defenses always fail eventually. A manipulator who understands authority bias can circumvent authority audits. Someone who recognizes flattery filters can adjust their praise patterns. A skilled operator can work around any individual defense mechanism by understanding how it works and adapting their approach accordingly. But layered defenses create exponential protection. Each layer uses different detection methods, asks different questions, and requires different types of evidence. A manipulator might fool one layer, but fooling all layers simultaneously becomes exponentially more difficult. The system provides redundancy without bureaucracy, protection without paralysis. The firewall doesn't replace human judgment, it enhances it. The goal isn't to eliminate all risk or create perfect decisions. It's to ensure that when you make mistakes, they're honest mistakes based on incomplete information rather than manipulated mistakes based on distorted information. The system preserves your ability to take calculated risks while protecting you from being manipulated into taking foolish ones. The 4-gate framework. The influence firewall operates through 4 sequential gates, each designed to catch different types of manipulation while building on the insights from previous layers. The gates don't just filter out bad ideas, they strengthen good ideas by forcing them to survive rigorous analysis. The first gate examines intent through systematic questioning that reveals the true motivations behind proposals and recommendations. This layer catches authority exploitation and manufactured urgency by requiring clear justification for timing, scope, and resource allocation. The questions are simple but revealing. Why this? Why now? Why us? The second gate validates data through independent verification that prevents cherry-picking and selective reporting. This layer implements the triangulate or trash rule, requiring multiple independent sources for any significant claims. It catches data distortion by demanding full context, alternative explanations, and contradictory evidence. The third gate assesses impact through pre-mortem analysis that identifies potential failure modes and unintended consequences. This layer catches consensus manipulation by requiring dissenting voices and alternative perspectives. It forces consideration of what could go wrong rather than just what might go right. The fourth gate confirms consent through documented agreement that ensures all stakeholders understand and support the decision. This layer catches gaslighting by creating clear records of who agreed to what and when. It prevents future manipulation by establishing objective baselines for accountability. The Netflix Captain Model. Reed Hastings faced a classic influence warfare challenge when Netflix was scaling from a DVD by mail service to a streaming platform. The company was making hundreds of critical decisions monthly, each with the potential to determine whether Netflix would dominate the future of entertainment or become a footnote in business history. The traditional approach would have been to centralize decision-making with senior leadership, but Hastings recognized that centralization created bottlenecks and single points of failure. Instead, he implemented what became known as the informed captain model, a system that distributed decision-making authority while maintaining rigorous oversight. Under this model, Every significant decision had a designated captain who was accountable for the outcome. But the captain couldn't make the decision alone. They had to navigate a structured process that included mandatory consultation, documented analysis, and formal challenge periods where anyone could raise objections. The system created what Hastings called distributed accountability with centralized standards. Captains had the authority to make decisions quickly, but they had to demonstrate that those decisions had survived rigorous analysis and stakeholder input. The process was fast enough to maintain Netflix's competitive advantage, while thorough enough to prevent manipulation and groupthink. The results were remarkable. Decision quality improved dramatically, while decision speed actually increased. The company avoided numerous strategic mistakes that competitors made while moving faster on opportunities that others missed. The informed captain model became a template that other high-growth companies adopted for managing complex decision-making at scale. The intent interrogation. The first layer of the Influence Firewall focuses on understanding the true motivations behind proposals and recommendations. This isn't about questioning people's integrity. It's about ensuring that decisions are based on clear, honest assessment of needs and opportunities rather than hidden agendas or manufactured urgency. The intent check operates through 3 sequential questions that become progressively more specific. The first question addresses the fundamental need. What problem are we solving, and how do we know it's a priority? This catches manufactured problems and artificial urgency by requiring clear evidence that action is necessary. The second question examines the proposed solution. Why is this approach optimal, and what alternatives did we consider? This catches authority exploitation and consensus manipulation by requiring comparative analysis rather than single-option thinking. It forces consideration of multiple approaches rather than acceptance of the first reasonable suggestion. The third question explores timing and resources. Why do we need to act now, and what's the cost of waiting for better information? This catches flattery-driven decisions and data-poor choices by requiring explicit justification for urgency and resource allocation. It creates space for verification and analysis rather than pressure for immediate commitment. The intent interrogation works because it separates legitimate business needs from manipulation-driven requests. Genuine opportunities can easily answer these questions with specific, verifiable information. Manipulation attempts struggle because they're based on artificial urgency, manufactured consensus, or hidden agendas that can't survive transparent analysis. The data validation layer. The second gate implements systematic verification that prevents data manipulation from compromising decision quality. This layer doesn't just check whether data is accurate, it ensures that data is complete, contextual, and independently verifiable. The triangulation requirement demands at least 3 independent sources for any significant claim or projection. This prevents cherry-picking by requiring comprehensive evidence rather than selective examples. It catches survivorship bias by demanding inclusion of negative results and failure cases alongside success stories. The context verification examines baselines, comparison groups, and time windows to ensure fair representation. This catches framing effects and baseline manipulation by requiring explicit justification for measurement choices. It prevents temporal cherry-picking by demanding multiple time horizons and trend analysis. The contradiction hunt actively seeks data that challenges or complicates the primary narrative. This catches confirmation bias by requiring consideration of disconfirming evidence. It prevents groupthink by ensuring that alternative explanations and competing hypotheses are explicitly addressed. The data validation layer creates a culture where evidence quality matters more than evidence convenience. Teams learn to gather comprehensive information rather than just supportive information. Decision-makers develop confidence in their choices because they know those choices have survived rigorous analytical scrutiny. The impact assessment gate. The third layer focuses on understanding potential consequences through systematic risk analysis and stakeholder impact assessment. This gate catches manipulation that relies on focusing attention on benefits while hiding costs or risks. The pre-mortem analysis requires teams to imagine that the decision has failed and work backwards to identify the most likely failure modes. This catches optimism bias and consensus pressure by forcing consideration of negative outcomes. It reveals hidden dependencies and unstated assumptions that might not surface during normal planning. The stakeholder impact assessment examines how the decision affects different groups within and outside the organization. This catches manipulation that benefits some stakeholders at the expense of others. It ensures that decisions consider broader consequences rather than just immediate benefits to decision makers. The reversibility analysis evaluates how difficult it would be to undo the decision if circumstances change or new information emerges. This catches manipulation that relies on creating irreversible commitments based on incomplete information. It preserves strategic flexibility by favoring decisions that can be adjusted as conditions evolve. The impact assessment creates a culture of strategic thinking that considers long-term consequences rather than just short-term benefits. Teams develop skill at identifying potential problems before they become actual problems. Leaders gain confidence in their decisions because they understand not just what might go right, but also what might go wrong. The consent documentation. The fourth and final gate ensures that all stakeholders understand and formally agree to the decision and its implications. This layer prevents future gaslighting by creating clear records of who agreed to what and when. The silent poll captures individual positions before group discussion can influence responses. This catches consensus manipulation by revealing the gap between private opinions and public positions. It ensures that apparent agreement reflects genuine agreement rather than social pressure. The documented sign-off requires explicit acknowledgement of the decision, its rationale, and its expected consequences. This prevents future manipulation by creating objective records that can't be easily revised or denied. It establishes clear accountability for outcomes. The escalation protocol defines how disagreements will be resolved and what happens when the firewall process reveals irreconcilable differences. This prevents manipulation of the process itself by establishing clear rules for handling conflicts and exceptions. The consent documentation creates a culture of transparency and accountability that makes manipulation much more difficult. When agreements are clear and documented, it becomes much harder for anyone to rewrite history or manipulate perceptions of what was decided. The bias heat map. Implement a quick diagnostic tool that helps identify which cognitive biases might be affecting a particular decision. The heat map takes less than a minute to complete, but provides valuable insight into potential manipulation vectors. The tool examines authority signals, flattery patterns, consensus pressure, data completeness, and timing urgency. Each factor gets a simple rating that creates a visual representation of manipulation risk. High-risk decisions automatically trigger additional firewall scrutiny. The heat map works because it makes invisible biases visible. Teams develop pattern recognition that helps them spot manipulation attempts before those attempts can influence their thinking. The tool becomes a shared language for discussing influence risks without creating confrontation or blame. Regular use of the bias heat map creates organizational immunity to manipulation. Teams become skilled at recognizing influence techniques and automatically apply appropriate countermeasures. The firewall becomes embedded in organizational culture rather than imposed as external process. The red team rotation. Establish quarterly red team days where different groups within the organization attempt to manipulate each other using the techniques described in this book. This gamified approach builds manipulation resistance while testing firewall effectiveness. The red team exercises reveal weaknesses in current defenses and help teams practice recognizing manipulation in low-stakes environments. They also build empathy and understanding by showing how easy it is to influence others when you understand cognitive biases and social dynamics. The rotation ensures that everyone gets experience both attacking and defending. building comprehensive understanding of influence warfare. Teams learn not just how to resist manipulation, but also how to avoid accidentally manipulating others through unconscious bias exploitation. The red team approach creates a culture where influence awareness is seen as a valuable skill rather than paranoid suspicion. Teams develop confidence in their ability to recognize and resist manipulation while maintaining healthy relationships and collaborative decision-making. The Firewall Maintenance Protocol. Like any security system, an influence firewall requires regular maintenance and updates to remain effective. Manipulators adapt their techniques over time, and organizational defenses must evolve to meet new threats. Conduct monthly firewall audits that examine recent decisions for signs of manipulation that might have slipped through the system. Look for patterns that suggest certain types of influence attempts are becoming more sophisticated or targeting new vulnerabilities. Update firewall procedures based on lessons learned from both successful defenses and missed attacks. Share insights across the organization so that everyone benefits from collective learning about manipulation techniques and countermeasures. Train new team members on firewall procedures during their first week, making influence awareness part of organizational onboarding rather than advanced training. This ensures that defensive capabilities are maintained as the team grows and changes. The maintenance protocol ensures that your influence firewall remains effective over time rather than becoming a bureaucratic ritual that provides false security. It creates a learning organization that continuously improves its ability to make decisions based on merit rather than manipulation. But building an influence firewall is just the beginning. The real power comes from integrating these defenses into a daily operating rhythm that makes manipulation resistance effortless and automatic. The final chapter reveals how to lock these habits into your organizational DNA and transform defensive tactics into a sustainable competitive advantage that compounds over time. Chapter 9, Mastery Momentum. The transformation happened faster than anyone expected. 3 months after implementing her influence firewall, Sarah's company felt like a completely different organization. Meetings that used to drag on for hours now reached clear decisions in minutes. Strategic pivots that once took weeks of political maneuvering now happened in days. Team members who had been quietly disengaged were suddenly contributing breakthrough insights. But the most remarkable change wasn't in the systems, it was in the people. "I can actually think clearly again," her VP of engineering told her during their weekly one-on-one. "I'm not spending half my mental energy trying to figure out who's playing games or what the real agenda is. I can just focus on building great products." Sarah nodded, recognizing the feeling. The constant low-level stress of navigating organizational politics had disappeared. The mental bandwidth she'd been unconsciously dedicating to influence warfare was now available for actual leadership. She was making better decisions faster, with more confidence and less second-guessing. The influence firewall hadn't just protected her company from manipulation, it had unleashed the collective intelligence of her team. When people could trust that decisions were based on merit rather than politics, they started bringing their best ideas forward. When they knew that dissent was valued rather than punished, they began surfacing problems before they became crises. The defensive system had become an offensive advantage. The compound effect of clarity. What Sarah discovered is that influence defense creates a positive feedback loop that compounds over time. Each manipulation attempt that gets caught strengthens the system. Each honest conversation builds trust. Each merit-based decision increases confidence in the process. The organization becomes antifragile, not just resistant to manipulation, but actually strengthened by attempts to manipulate it. The compound effect operates through what systems theorists call a virtuous cycle. Better decision-making processes lead to better outcomes. Better outcomes attract better people. Better people make the decision-making processes even stronger. The cycle accelerates over time, creating exponential rather than linear improvement. This compounding happens because influence defense eliminates the hidden tax that manipulation places on organizational performance. When teams don't have to waste energy on political games, that energy gets redirected toward productive work. When leaders don't have to second-guess their own judgment, they can move faster and take smarter risks. When decisions are based on evidence rather than influence, the quality of outcomes improves dramatically. The result is an organization that operates at a fundamentally higher level of effectiveness. Not just 10% better or 20% better, but categorically different. The kind of difference that creates sustainable competitive advantages and attracts the best talent in the market. Your manipulation-proof operating system. The journey through this book has equipped you with a complete defense system against insider manipulation. You now understand how the insider threat lifecycle works and how to interrupt it at each phase. You can spot authority exploits and neutralize them with verification protocols. You recognize flattery loops and counter them with gratitude filters. You detect consensus coups and prevent them with structured dissent. You catch data distortion through triangulation requirements. You block gaslight attacks with documentation shields. And you integrate everything through your Influence Firewall. But knowledge without implementation is just expensive entertainment. The real power comes from embedding these defenses into your daily operating rhythm until they become as automatic as checking your email or reviewing your calendar. The goal is making manipulation resistance effortless rather than effortful. Start with the techniques that feel most natural and relevant to your current challenges. If you're dealing with someone who constantly name-drops senior leadership, implement authority audits. If you're surrounded by excessive praise followed by big requests, deploy flattery filters. If your meetings always seem to reach unanimous agreement too easily, introduce structured dissent protocols. The key is building momentum through small wins rather than trying to implement everything at once. Each successful defense makes the next one easier. Each manipulation attempt you catch builds confidence in the system. Each honest conversation creates trust that makes future conversations more honest. The trust dividend. One of the most surprising benefits of influence defense is how it transforms relationships rather than damaging them. Many leaders worry that implementing these systems will create suspicion, reduce collaboration, or make them appear paranoid. The opposite actually happens. When people know that decisions are based on merit rather than manipulation, they trust the process more, not less. When they understand that dissent is valued and protected, they're more willing to share honest feedback. When they see that evidence matters more than influence, they put more effort into gathering good evidence. The systems create what researchers call swift trust, the ability to collaborate effectively with people you don't know well because you trust the processes and structures that govern the interaction. Team members don't have to trust each other perfectly. They just have to trust that the system will catch and correct manipulation attempts. This trust dividend pays exponential returns over time. Teams move faster because they don't have to navigate political landmines. Innovation increases because people feel safe proposing unconventional ideas. Retention improves because talented people prefer working in environments where merit matters more than politics. The result is an organization that attracts and retains the kind of people who create breakthrough results. The Influence Firewall becomes a talent magnet that gives you access to capabilities your competitors can't match. The Netflix Candor Engine. Reed Hastings provides the ultimate example of how influence defense scales with organizational growth. When Netflix was a small startup, informal communication and personal relationships were sufficient to prevent manipulation. But as the company grew from dozens to hundreds to thousands of employees, those informal systems broke down. Hastings recognized that scaling required systematizing the cultural elements that had made Netflix successful when it was small. He couldn't rely on personal relationships to prevent manipulation across a global organization with thousands of employees. He needed systems that would preserve the company's decision-making quality regardless of size. The solution was what Hastings called the candor engine, a comprehensive system of processes, rituals, and cultural norms designed to ensure that the best ideas won, regardless of who proposed them or how they were presented. The system included structured feedback processes, mandatory dissent protocols, evidence-based decision-making requirements, and transparent communication standards. The candor engine didn't just prevent manipulation. It turned Netflix into one of the most innovative companies in the world. By ensuring that decisions were based on merit rather than politics, the company could move faster and take smarter risks than competitors who were slowed down by internal influence warfare. The system scaled from 100 employees to over 10,000 while maintaining the decision-making quality that had made Netflix successful. The company avoided the bureaucratic sclerosis that typically accompanies rapid growth because the candor engine prevented the accumulation of political processes that slow down large organizations. The strategic speed advantage. Organizations with strong influence defenses move faster than their competitors, not slower. This seems counterintuitive. Shouldn't additional verification and analysis slow down decision-making? The opposite happens because influence defense eliminates the hidden delays that manipulation creates. When decisions are based on manipulation rather than merit, they often need to be revisited, revised, or completely reversed when reality doesn't match the manipulated expectations. The time spent implementing bad decisions, fixing their consequences, and rebuilding trust after manipulation is exposed far exceeds the time invested in prevention. Influence defense also eliminates the political maneuvering that typically accompanies important decisions. When people know that merit matters more than influence, they spend their time gathering evidence and developing solutions rather than building coalitions and managing perceptions. The energy that would have been wasted on politics gets redirected toward productive work. The result is an organization that can pivot faster when market conditions change, implement new strategies more effectively, and respond to competitive threats more quickly. The influence firewall becomes a source of strategic agility that compounds over time. The delegation breakthrough. One of the most liberating effects of influence defense is how it enables confident delegation. Many leaders struggle to delegate important decisions because they worry about manipulation, politics, or hidden agendas affecting the outcomes. The influence firewall removes these concerns by creating systems that ensure delegated decisions meet the same quality standards as personal decisions. When you know that authority exploits will be caught by verification protocols, you can delegate without worrying about people using your name to push through questionable initiatives. When you know that data distortion will be prevented by triangulation requirements, you can trust analytical work done by others. When you know that consensus manipulation will be blocked by structured dissent, you can rely on team decisions. This delegation capability is transformative for growing organizations. Leaders can focus on vision and strategy while trusting their teams to handle implementation details. Teams can move faster because they don't need constant approval for routine decisions. The organization can scale without creating bottlenecks or single points of failure. The influence firewall becomes the foundation for building a high-trust, high-delegation culture that attracts ambitious people who want to make meaningful contributions rather than play political games. The competitive moat. Over time, strong influence defenses create a sustainable competitive advantage that becomes increasingly difficult for competitors to replicate. The advantage operates through multiple mechanisms that reinforce each other. First, the organization attracts better talent because ambitious, capable people prefer working in environments where merit matters more than politics. This talent advantage compounds over time as great people attract other great people, and mediocre people find the environment uncomfortable. Second, the organization makes better decisions because those decisions are based on evidence rather than influence. This leads to better outcomes, which create resources for further investment in capabilities and opportunities. The decision-making advantage compounds through better resource allocation and strategic positioning. Third, the organization moves faster because it doesn't waste time on political processes or recovering from manipulation-driven mistakes. This speed advantage compounds through earlier market entry, faster iteration cycles, and more responsive customer service. The combination creates what Warren Buffett calls an economic moat, a sustainable competitive advantage that becomes stronger over time rather than weaker. Competitors can copy your products, strategies, or processes, but they can't easily replicate a culture of integrity that has been built through years of consistent influence defense. Your 30-minute starting point. The journey toward manipulation-proof leadership begins with a single 30-minute conversation. Schedule an insider threat scan with your core team this week. The agenda is simple. Review the manipulation techniques covered in this book and discuss which ones might be affecting your organization. Don't make this a witch hunt or blame session. Frame it as a strategic planning exercise focused on improving decision-making quality and organizational effectiveness. Ask questions like, where do we see authority being used to bypass analysis? When do compliments seem to precede big requests? How do we ensure that consensus is genuine rather than manufactured? What data might we be missing in our current decision processes? The goal isn't to identify specific manipulators. It's to identify systemic vulnerabilities that could be exploited by anyone with the right knowledge and motivation. Focus on strengthening processes rather than policing people. Use this conversation to select 1 or 2 influence defense techniques to implement immediately. Start with the ones that feel most relevant to your current challenges and most feasible given your organizational culture. Build momentum through early wins rather than trying to implement everything at once. The flywheel effect. As you implement these defenses, you'll discover that they create a self-reinforcing cycle that becomes easier and more effective over time. Each manipulation attempt that gets caught strengthens team confidence in the system. Each honest conversation builds trust that makes future conversations more honest. Each merit-based decision increases belief that merit actually matters. This flywheel effect means that influence defense becomes less effortful over time, not more. The habits become automatic. The culture becomes self-policing. The systems become embedded in how work gets done rather than additional overhead on top of work. The flywheel also creates organizational immunity to manipulation. Team members develop pattern recognition that helps them spot influence attempts before those attempts can succeed. They become skilled at asking the right questions, seeking the right evidence, and applying the right safeguards automatically. Eventually, the organization becomes so resistant to manipulation that manipulators stop trying. They recognize that their techniques won't work and either adapt to the merit-based culture or find opportunities elsewhere. The Influence Firewall creates a selection pressure that favors honest, capable people while discouraging political operators. The ultimate payoff. Here's the stunning truth that most leaders never discover. The ultimate benefit of influence defense isn't protection from manipulation, it's liberation for innovation. When you eliminate the hidden tax that manipulation places on organizational performance, you unlock capabilities you didn't know you had. Mental bandwidth that was unconsciously dedicated to political navigation becomes available for strategic thinking. Energy that was wasted on influence warfare gets redirected toward breakthrough innovation. Trust that was eroded by hidden agendas gets rebuilt through transparent processes. The result is an organization that operates at its full potential rather than a fraction of its capability. Teams that were previously constrained by politics suddenly produce breakthrough results. Leaders who were previously reactive to manipulation become proactive about opportunity. Strategies that were previously compromised by hidden agendas become laser-focused on market success. You don't just get protection from manipulation, you get access to the collective intelligence of your entire organization. You don't just avoid bad decisions, you consistently make great decisions. You don't just prevent political games, you create a culture where the best ideas win regardless of where they come from. This is the compound effect of integrity. This is the competitive advantage of clarity. This is the exponential return on building systems that ensure merit matters more than manipulation. Your moment of choice. You now possess something that most leaders never acquire: a complete understanding of how influence warfare works and a comprehensive system for defending against it. You know how manipulators operate, what techniques they use, and how to neutralize their attacks before they can compromise your judgment. But knowledge without action is worthless. The techniques in this book only work if you implement them. The defenses only protect you if you build them. The competitive advantages only materialize if you commit to the daily disciplines that create them. Right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can close this book, return to your normal routine, and hope that good intentions and smart people will protect you from manipulation. Or you can acknowledge that influence warfare is real, that it's happening in your organization right now, and that you have both the responsibility and the capability to do something about it. The manipulators are counting on your inaction. They're betting that you'll dismiss this as paranoia, that you'll trust in the inherent goodness of your team, that you'll prioritize harmony over vigilance. They're hoping you'll choose comfort over competence, familiarity over effectiveness. Don't give them that advantage. Your profit margins, your company culture, your strategic vision, and your personal legacy are under attack right now. The question isn't whether insider manipulation is happening, it's whether you're going to build the defenses that stop it. The tools are in your hands, the knowledge is in your head, the opportunity is in front of you. Secure your decisions, guard your vision, grow without fear. Start right now. The future of your organization and the full expression of your leadership potential depends on what you do in the next 30 minutes. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Don't hope that someone else will solve this problem for you. Pick up your phone, schedule that insider threat scan, begin building your influence firewall today. Your manipulation-proof future starts now.